The sea, and what lies hidden beneath it, is proving to be man's richest resource for the future, a previously hidden realm, now the focus of intensive exploitation. That future promise comes from an understanding of its past, not only of the geology of the Earth, but for a new dimension of understanding of the history of mankind. Deep in the middle of the North Sea, from an undisturbed core of the seabed, comes new evidence of the antiquity of man's life and works. A tiny piece of flint, fashioned and used by prehistoric man in a land which sank beneath the sea 10,000 years ago. Truly new history from the sea. Beneath the water, the unexpected is usually to be expected, as with these islands in the Scottish Lochs. They are crannogs, man-made prehistoric islands, a fact confirmed by one of the earliest exploits of true underwater archaeology here in Loch Ness. Fort Augustus Abbey is the home of the Benedictine teaching order. In 1902, amongst its members was a monk of extraordinary determination and energy, Dom Odo Blundell. Father Blundell was fascinated by crannogs. He was equally fascinated by the diving operations at the end of the nearby Caledonian Canal. Aged 35, with no training or experience, Dom Odo changed his monastic robes for the diving dress.
It had occurred to me that advantage should be taken of the canal diving suit, which could be hired at a small cost. And accordingly, on 7th August, a start was made soon after 2 o'clock. By the time the island was reached and the diving dress adjusted, it was about 3.
Dr. Nick Dixon is the modern authority on crannogs. 85 years later, on the same island, he is also about to experience what Odo Blundell experienced for the first time, a descent in the standard closed diving dress as evolved in 1837 by Augustus Seeby, and basically little changed in principle to this day.
Okay.
I don't see any wrinkles.
Okay.
For 4 generations of divers, this ritual is part of diving.
Different weight, huh?
The heavy weights worn front and back are designed to counteract the buoyancy induced by air enclosed in the suit and helmet. In water, the combined weight of lead and helmet is unnoticeable. In air, the weight is noticeable indeed.
Right. Ready.
It is also easily forgotten that once closed into his helmet, the diver is dependent upon air from the pump, even on the surface. Nonetheless, it was the safest and most practical diving apparatus ever invented, ideal for the engineer, if not for the archaeologist.
He round the pump. Easy. Slow. Stand up, diver. You're in now.
Nick Dixon recalls the exploits of Odo Blundell.
Give us some slack.
The first descent was made in about 12 feet of water on the west side of the island, but owing to the inexperience of the amateurs at the air pump, little serious work was done.
Faster. Heave round, boy. The diver more air.
The excess of air which was supplied to me had the effect of making me so buoyant that I was floating over the tops of the stones instead of stepping firmly on them, and that despite the 2 lead weights of 56 pounds each attached to the already very heavy helmet and boots. Yet even with this disadvantage, some points of interest were ascertained.
Give the diver more air.
But even on his first descent, Dom Odo noticed the timbers and spars of the original prehistoric builders and was immediately enthused.
After resting a quarter of an hour, during which the 2 experienced divers, who had charge of the lifeline and air tube, heartily congratulated their new apprentice on his successful performance from their point of view, I went down again. The half-inch of sediment, however, which covered everything, had been disturbed by my previous visit, so that the water, instead of being perfectly clear, had a muddy appearance, only allowing one to see about a foot in front of one. For 20 minutes I walked to and fro, feeling for the spar, but had to return to the open without finding it.
Yet in the space of only 2 dives, he was able to observe and record enough material to form the basis of a report, which, made without the ability to make notes underwater, was remarkable for its accuracy.
Taking, therefore, the points above mentioned into consideration, the wooden flooring, the trunks of timber lying along the circumference of the building and not to be seen elsewhere, the gentle and symmetrical pitch of the rubble, the even surface presented by the layer of large stones with the smaller ones underneath, and the clearly defined margin between the rubble and the floor of the loch quite free of stones, there seems to be ample proof that the whole island was originally of artificial construction.
Enthused by his success, Dom Odo took to the hills in search of other cranogs.
The first 8 miles of the road was moderately good, and the strong spring cart got the 10 hundredweight up the hills fairly easily. But for the last 1.5 miles, there was nothing but the roughest of peat tracks, so that it seemed quite impossible to get such a weight to the loch. The great readiness with which Mr. Archibald MacDonald offered to place his horses and carts at our disposal in order that we might have a good try overcame all obstacles, and the apparatus was safely taken to the loch side. Mr. MacDonald, like several others who gave me the greatest assistance in this investigation, would take nothing for his services.
The investigation of this island in Loch Bruyach requires a 200-yard walk across the loch and demonstrates another limitation of the standard dress, namely the length of hose available to be dragged about. But Dom Odo had other troubles.
He ran a bump.
In consequence of the most severe thundershower that any of the company could remember, the investigation was nearly deferred to the following day. But the serious assertion of one of those present that he feared that the water kelpies were very angry at the intrusion and had brought on the rain decided me to start operations at once. Several gentlemen from Beaulieu very kindly offered to assist at the less responsible positions, and ultimately a most interesting inspection of the island was made.
A beginning for archaeology underwater. But interest in classical antiquities underwater has a longer history. 17 miles from Rome in Lake Nemi, as early as 1446, divers reported 2 Roman galleys beneath the lake. And by 1535, Guillaume de Lorraine was employing diving engineers in a vain attempt to lift them. Their presence was reconfirmed by standard divers in the 1920s. But such a delicate archaeological task was beyond this equipment. In October 1928, Mussolini's solution was simple. If the tasks could not be performed underwater, then the water would be taken away, all 31 million tons of it, and pumped 25 kilometers into the sea. A year's pumping revealed the unimaginable, a wooden floating theater from the time of the Emperor Caligula, over 200 feet in length and 60 feet wide, just as divers had reported for the past 400 years. Proof to an unsuspecting public of what the underwater world could reveal. But not content with mere revelation, they then began on land the task of removing the entire ship from the surrounding mud and dragging it, complete and in one piece, out of the lake for permanent display. A task which today would have been completed with ease underwater. The pumping continued for a further 2 years, to reveal the second galley reported by the divers. A galley even larger than the first and even better preserved. It should have been a lesson to all of the tremendous skill of ancient shipbuilders a lesson in the potential for survival beneath the water of the most amazing and unlikely ships and structures from the past. It should have been. Imagine what might be revealed if the Mediterranean were pumped away, or if divers were able to explore the seas without limitations, what might not be revealed. That lesson was lost. On the 1st of June 1944, the ships in their museum were burnt to the ground at the end of the Battle for Rome. 9 years of effort and 2,000 years of history passed into oblivion. Not until 1959 did the raising of the Vasa reassert that potential, and outside Vasa, a reminder of the skills of the diver 300 years ago. In 1658, Albrecht von Treleben worked on the Vasa with great success, with a primitive diving bell. But how? Evidence, even from his successor, Martin Trewald, is sketchy as to how this worked at sea. But such machines were regularly used in the 1680s, and from here, Kalmar on the Swedish Baltic coast. And from here, two men have set out to re-examine these techniques. Anders Franzén, the discoverer of the Vasa, has made a study of the existing plans and records of von Treleben and his other Swedish successors, and recruited diver and marine technician Bengt Grisell to reconstruct their dives.
The problem was that we found out that they were very secret how they did this, because this was, so to say, trade secret. So it's very difficult to get sources to see how they did this. So you have to get to know it, you have to do it yourself. If they could do it, I mean, I sure could do it too.
But what were the practical limitations of working at depths of up to 90 feet? How long could they work with available air? What were the limits of visibility? And how practical were their instruments working from within the radius of the bell? Only a trial would tell. Making the bell is no mystery, the original being either cast, stave built of wood lined with lead, or riveted copper. The welded copy would be neither better nor worse. The secret is in the proportions and its stability underwater, or lack of it. For 7 years, between 1679 and 1686, a ship sailed from Kalmar carrying just such a bell to a site 6 kilometers off the island of Öland. Its destination, the wreck of the warship Kronen. The test will take place on the same site. For safety, the bell is first lowered unoccupied to the wreck site some 80 feet below. The original diver, clad in oiled leather, would have accompanied it standing on the weight. After 300 years' absence, a diving bell hovers over the Kronen's guns, guns the original divers did not recover. Why? Grisell began the first experiment to find out. Monitored carefully from above, work begins using the air in the bell. The pole and hook was the simplest of their many tools. If this could be used efficiently, then the others could be more so. It looks deceptively easy, but that is the skill of the experienced diver, a skill shared by Grisell with his 17th century predecessors. The contemporary reports of divers working in the depths from dawn till dusk were decidedly not imaginary.
We were down for 10 minutes only, but I think you can be without any problem for 20 minutes. And I think that was the reason why they didn't get any diving sickness, because the air and the cold was the limit of the diving time.
Thick mist caused of the divers' breathing showed the cold of these Baltic waters and the accuracy of contemporary reports. They report guns of up to 4 tons being lifted and as many as 26 in one season. A full descent is now made using only the available air in the bell. But imagine being lowered manually from a sailing ship, miles offshore and at the mercy of the weather. Speed and efficiency were paramount.
That was the most interesting things with this experiment. It's obvious that during such conditions, I think you leave the bell and go out and tie a rope to the canvas and then go back to the bell. We know they did this when the water was clear and the light was enough, and it's very obvious for a diver to do this.
Clear water and calm weather seem to be the only limitations of safe working.
It's very safe. You feel very safe about it. I mean, every man who can swim will do this.
Not recorded was the bravery, fortitude, and sheer unpleasantness which doing this meant 300 years ago. Divers like this succeeded in recovering 60 of the Cronen's 126 guns. Their incentive was simple. The guns were worth more than the ship and were reusable. Divers were expendable. As always, war hastened the need for invention. Diving was no exception. In times of peace, inventions are developed by others for other means. Robert Stenui, the Belgian diver and historian, has followed the fortunes of early divers, whose largest employer in the 18th century was the Dutch East India Company, and of one diver in particular, a Devonshire man, John Lethbridge. This rare sketch shows Lethbridge entering the sea in his patent diving engine, his trade, fishing for silver. Stenui was to follow his trail to the Madeiran island of Porto Santo. In 60 feet of water, in a treacherous cove, lay their joint quarry, the East Indiaman Slot ter Hoog, lost in 1724 and salvaged by Lethbridge for 9 years after. He had certainly not removed the guns, and not because he was unable to. His contract was for the recovery of 3.5 tons of silver bars. Mr. Lethbridge's fishery went well, said the records, and his gratifications were for 90% of the silver. So where was the other 10%? Beyond his reach or capability? Or were the records untrue? 5 months' work brought proof. A single silver bar. Followed, days later, by more, under a broken iron cannon, and hidden both from Stenui and Lethbridge, lay a chest of silver bars, the only one in the world to survive, the last of the 15 chests from 1724. Silver was the lifeblood of the China trade, its loss crippling to the company, its safe recovery a profitable living for divers like Lethbridge with ability and integrity. The missing 144 silver bars.
There was the proof that he had actually worked efficiently at 18 meters. We finished up what he could not do at the time, but what we wondered was really how did he do it? What was the tool he used? What was that barrel? So Henri Deleuze and I decided that we should build a replica of his diving barrel, of his diving machine, from the original plans.
Plan and elevation of the barrel with which the English diver has fished up the pieces of 8 from about 8 to 10 fathoms deep from the ship which has perished in front of Marseille in the month of October last. The first of the 2 figures of elevation shows the front face, which becomes the lower face when the barrel is being used in the sea.
But why did Lethbridge do this?
Necessity being the parent of invention, and being, in the year 1715, quite reduced, and having a large family, my thoughts turned upon some extraordinary method to retrieve my misfortunes, and was prepossessed that it might be practicable to contrive a machine to recover wrecks lost in the sea.
Even today, making that barrel is a complex operation. Unlike a conventional barrel, it is designed to resist pressure from outside rather than from within, a fact which Mr. Lethbridge's cooper must have known, but a challenge to the Scottish shipwrights who built this faithful copy from plans drawn up by a French industrial spy in 1734.
I'm doing a wee bit. Getting the bolt.
Despite his ingenuity and integrity, Mr. Lethbridge was not without his illusions.
I would not be misunderstood in saying that I am the first inventor of a diving engine without communication of air.
The critical part of it, of course, is the sleeves, because that is where the water seepage can be and generally is. It's delicate because, of course, the diver is inside at atmospherical pressure, and outside on the arms he has the bottom pressure. Ceci, où ça va en biseau et
The diver is an integral part of the diving engine.
Voilà. Tu montres à nos amis Michel et Jo. Et on va serrer le.
He must be physically attached to the barrel by the sleeves, made of oiled leather, and tied in with strong cord. He is then securely bolted in.
Un peu plus haut. Ouvre le bouchon, non?
The test was carried out in the safety of a diving tank in Marseille. But again, imagine handling this machine, weighing nearly a ton, on a ship at sea.
Even at 10 feet, the constriction really did hurt. Still, that first experiment was useful in allowing me to see where the main leaks came from in the barrel itself.
This too would be a dangerous operation at sea.
Pause. Fini, terminé.
Perhaps the sleeves would work better if they were shorter.
Well, long sleeves or shortened sleeves, all I know is that they still leak and they still hurt. The water comes in much faster than Lethbridge would have thought tolerable, and I can't move any more easily. I can move my empty hands, yes, but I certainly couldn't work, and I'm certainly no efficient silver fisher yet. Suddenly, something goes very wrong.
Bon, bah, on va continuer avec les manches en néoprène.
What had gone wrong is that the water pressure had forcibly driven the sleeves inside the barrel.
Yeah. We have to find something else. Le nouveau principe.
Perhaps that plan had been deliberately falsified. Logic dictates a better sleeve, and if this system would work, perhaps this incredible array of salvage instruments, also drawn at the time, would work as well.
The sleeves did work, at last. And I could use the tools just as efficiently as a true fisher should.
The diver, by the movement of his hands, progresses and turns around as he pleases without much difficulty, much as a turtle does in a garden. Then, he does those various movements with quite a speed. When the signal is given to change the air, the barrel is taken to the surface and new air introduced with a pair of bellows. Those two openings being snugly plugged again, one lets the barrel go down again to the bottom of the sea as before, to carry on the fishing. But he works like this time and again for 3 to 4 hours, and sometimes for a much longer period without coming out of the barrel.
But would it work at 30 feet, Lethbridge's accustomed depth?
As the barrel was inching its way into the darkness of the well, I remembered the words of Sir Edmund Halley, Lethbridge's friend and critic.
If there is any defect, the whole engine will instantly fill with water, which will rush in with so much violence as to endanger the life of the man below, who may be drowned before he can be drawn up. Upon both accounts, the danger increases with the depth.
Further down, I thought of what had happened to Captain Irvine, an imitator of John Lethbridge.
At a depth of 11 fathoms, he felt a strong stricture about his arms by the pressure of the water, and that venturing 2 fathoms deeper to take the pieces of 8, the circulation of his blood was so far stopped, and he suffered so much, that he was forced to keep to his bed for 6 weeks. And I have heard of another that died in 3 days for having ventured to go down 14 fathoms.
I could only go to 10 meters in the well, but I felt so safe operating at that depth that I couldn't doubt the truth of the words of John Lethbridge himself.
I can move about a 12-foot square on the bottom, where I have stayed many times 3 to 4 minutes. I have been 10 fathoms deep many 100 times, and I have been 12 fathoms, but with great difficulty. I could, if necessary, quote many gentlemen of considerable rank in this kingdom and Holland, who are well acquainted with my capacity and veracity in this respect. I am, sir, yours respectfully, John Lethbridge.
Freedom and mobility 20,000 leagues under the sea had long been a dream, made universal in the 19th century by the most fantastic undersea epic ever written. But how much of Captain Nemo's imaginary world under the sea was purely fictitious? The answer comes from the most unlikely place to find anything remotely connected with discoveries underwater. High in the Massif Central in southern France is the ancient town of Espalion. Through its center runs the River Lot, spanned by a medieval bridge. In the town itself stand memorials to 2 men, the tomb of one noting only his standing as a retired officer in the Navy. The other commemorated as a mining engineer. But within the town is an exceptional museum of diving, which attracted Robert Stenouille.
It was in the year 1860 that Benoît Rouquayrol, born here in Espalion, invented his patented régulateur pour l'écoulement des gaz comprimés. That was the key component of an apparatus destined to bring quick rescue to miners who had been trapped in smoke or unbreathable areas after a fire in the mine. Soon it was transformed so it could be used underwater in a flooded gallery to go and open a critical valve, perhaps. Then he associated with another Frenchman from the same area of Espalion, a young naval officer, Auguste de Nérouze, and the 2 of them transformed the original invention into a true free diving apparatus. This one. Today, those men are honored in their little town and in this museum, and largely ignored in the rest of the world. Because everyone attributes, quite wrongly so, their invention to another team of another French engineer and another naval officer, a very famous sea captain, who built 80 years later what is essentially the very same machine, except that they built it at the right time in the development of the technology of compressed air, and at the right time in the evolution of the leisure market.
But in 1860, the leisure market did not exist. The incredulous might ask, would it really work? The museum was happy to prove it. The sales brochure describes the machine as an artificial lung or reservoir regulator, and was first tested under this bridge at Espalion. It is shown as a machine of classical simplicity, a pressure tank of air holding 8 liters, and mounted above it the regulator valve, a true forerunner of Captain Cousteau's device of the 1940s. Robert Stenouille was anxious to try this original machine for real.
Parfait.
the equipment is not complete without the nose clip, a true pince-nez. The pressure in the tank is raised to 250 pounds, and the diver is free to go.
Les pompeurs, oui.
There is a tradition of naked diving with bare eyes in this part of France, giving rise to the following remark from the catalogue. Water is more tonic than harmful for the sight. The general rule is that one must keep one's sight free when working underwater. There are great advantages to that with regard to the rapidity of working. Apart from the problems of vision, the machine worked perfectly.
Impeccable. Impeccable. Merci messieurs, vous étiez très bien.
This machine is the low-pressure version, capable of working without the hose for short periods at depths of up to 20 feet. With the hose, the diver can work freely for as long as he can stand the cold. But could he swim freely with the device?
Impeccable, hein?
With tanks recharged, a second attempt was made without the sandals. The Aqualung had almost arrived. But this was essentially a machine designed for work, and something had to be done about the cold. The answer, somewhat impractically, was a woolen diving dress, complete with the traditional diver's red hat. And something had to be done about the eyesight. Goggles, such as are worn by locomotive drivers, was their answer. At first sight, a correct solution, but not everything they invented was right first time.
On pouvait s'y attendre. Plein d'eau immédiatement. Bon, ça...
By 1865, a second classical solution had been designed to overcome the problems of cold and vision. The gouin, or snout. The helmet and rubberized suit were not designed to hold breathable air, but simply to make the artificial lung more comfortable, a sort of 19th century dry suit.
Montez en pression. Le réservoir est vide là.
There were disadvantages, however, like 20 pounds of lead on top of the head to counteract buoyancy.
Serrez les dents.
All this effort also had the effect of consuming more air. It was a case of one step forward, two steps backward, until a high-pressure tank was evolved. But it worked, and still does. It was sold effectively for many years to the navies of the world, and it was available in 1865. Nor was it the end of their ingenuity. Their underwater telephone was patented in 1874.
Si ça va très bien, tu frappes deux coups.
Simple, cheap, and it worked.
On a fait descendre tout de suite à l'échelle. Rendez-vous à l'échelle.
A year later saw their underwater light. The flame of an oil lamp breathed pressurized air through a regulator, just like the diver. Before the advent of electricity, they had solved the problems of light and sound underwater. But the real achievement was the invention of a high-pressure machine, which in 1865 was capable of working autonomously in depths of up to 40 meters. Scuba diving had begun.
Commercially, the invention of the scuba, the free-diving apparatus using a demand valve, had come too early. And equally, it is not very well known that when Jules Verne wrote his 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and put Captain Nemo into a Roquerolles de Nérou's free-swimming apparatus to go and recover the treasures of Vigo Bay, he was actually taking his documentation from commercial brochures of the time. He had not invented anything.
The 19th century was an age of bold leaps of imagination. In Sweden, the difficulty of sailing right around the country was solved using the entire Swedish army to dig a canal from one sea to the other. The result of 20 years' intensive work, the Göta Canal, opened in 1832 and still used today. The canal links two enormous lakes, and the passage was completed, then as now, by the newly invented self-propelled ships. This was the beginning of the era of the steamship, the earliest in Sweden arriving in 1816. The originality was to use steam power for both lakes and canal. The ships were, of course, paddle steamers, the brief era of steam propulsion soon ousted by the advent of the propeller. And there was a problem inherent in their design for use on a canal with 58 locks to negotiate, the width of the paddle wheels amidships. Typically, an ingenious solution was found, one realized in this ship, one of the earliest, built in 1836 and sketched by the young Prince of Sweden, the Erik Nordenvall. In 1980, this bell was brought up for safekeeping by divers whose patient search relocated this pioneering steamship, remembered only by this childish sketch, and which sank to the bottom of Lake Vättern on the 4th of June, 1856. In 1987, a new expedition of the original divers, together with Carl Olof Cederlund of the Swedish Maritime Museum, sets out across this unpredictable lake, bringing 20th century technology in search of 19th century ingenuity.
Since the ship was located in 1980, there's been developed a plan for the investigation of this ship, and that consists of 3 stages. And the first stage is the documentation or recording of the ship as a whole. And there we are now in the end of that step or stage. And then we have a second one, and that is the raising of objects or even parts of the ship. And then we have a third possible stage, and that is the raising of the ship for preservation and put on exhibition, and for putting on exhibition here in the nearby town of Motala.
This is an exceptional operation, using men and machines. Åke Bernier, the original discoverer, is a professional diver equipped with the latest technology. It's the sort of technology dreamed of by those early pioneers, a light, easily fitted helmet, equipped with communications and supplied with limitless air from the surface, breathed naturally without a mouthpiece. It needs to be. The Erik Nordenvall lies in 150 feet of cold, dark water. At this depth, work is limited to 15 minutes in over 1 hour's diving. The Erik Nordenvall is exceptional for another reason. She is not a wreck. As in the imagination of Jules Verne, after 130 years underwater, she sits upright on the bottom of the lake, perfectly intact. As if deliberately placed there, she remains, as in the prince's drawing, funnel, masts and rigging, engines and fittings, all in place. The diver can move about the ship as if her loss had occurred only a week ago.
Det är för dålig sikt och kabeln räcker inte. Du tar en på den gula också, du Busse. Ja, vi avvaktar lite.
From bow to stern, the solid oak hull, preserved by the cold, pure waters of the lake, lies with all its fittings, even to the signal gun, to announce her arrival.
Ja, det är halvdålig bild. Du kan gå tillbaks.
The purpose of the human diving operation is to lay fluorescent green measuring tapes horizontally along the deck in preparation for the second stage of the operation. Not an easy job when all the fittings and superstructure are still lying in position where they were in 1856.
Yeah.
The Sea Owl, a remote vehicle, is the second component of the underwater operation.
Ja, det tänds.
Bert Westenberg of the Maritime Museum and his colleagues have the task of producing a photographic mosaic of the ship, a task which the Owl can perform without limitation of time or depth. Mr. Lethbridge's engine without the man.
Jag sätter dit bakstycket.
Guided by its electronic video camera, the Owl records back its position, depth and heading, and its own progress is recorded continuously from the relative comfort of 150 feet above. Specifically adapted to swim vertically, the remote vehicle charts the arrangement of the paddle wheels, specially designed to allow the Norderval to navigate the narrow locks. In some ships, the wheels were recessed into the hull. In the case of the Norderval, the wood and iron wheels are simply astonishingly narrow. But this gloom hides no secrets from the Sea Owl, even to the privacy of the ship's toilet. The decks remain intact, for the single reason that on sinking, the ship was under tow and the engines extinguished.
Klart, okej. In. Ja, vi gör så här. Vi går till...
As a result, the boiler did not explode, and consequently everything on the ship, above and below decks, is perfectly preserved within the entire 75 feet of the vessel. As the machine finishes work, the divers begin again.
Ja, men jag frågar visst hur slöver ser ut.
Man, with his ingenuity and sheer adaptability, can do what machines cannot, to go below these decks. Here is the world of the stagecoach afloat, the world of the 1830s, reflected in the intact windows. The folding tables, the paintwork and empire decoration survive in the private cabins. Further aft lie the benches where the saloon passengers may have slept side by side, a reminder of an older way of travelling. To enter this world is a rare experience, but not without its dangers. Yet here is a sight of the world of the 18th and 19th centuries at the moment of transition, the link between the age of sail and the age of steam, embodied in this little ship. The piecing together of this remarkable survivor from the past can now be done in the museum. But it is more than just a composite picture of a ship. It is the picture of a ship which in its own day, 150 years ago, was itself regarded as spectacular as Concorde, and its method of propulsion as feared and as awesome as nuclear energy. From this picture of the Erik Nordeval, as now recorded by underwater archaeology, it is possible to step back into the Industrial Revolution, a possibility undreamt of a generation ago. The ship itself is safe but inaccessible, its history secure. But what of its future?
I would like to get it raised and put in a museum in Motala near the Göta Canal and have it there as a memory of a very vital part of the Swedish history, namely the start of the Industrial Revolution and the Communications Revolution. I think that these vessels coming from the depth, very well preserved, are very good means to present history in a new way, in a very engaging way, and this is one of them.
But perhaps the most spectacular way of all occurred in 1986 on the other side of the Atlantic. The submersible Alvin is lowered from its mothership as the culmination of an expedition to locate underwater a ship whose very construction 100 years ago was unthinkable, whose eventual loss in 1912 was unimaginable, and whose present rediscovery was thought to be impossible. The Titanic. Two and a half miles beneath the sea, its discoverer, Dr. Robert Ballard, and his colleague, Martin Bowen, fly a remote camera vehicle from within a machine beyond the wildest imaginings of Jules Verne. They could echo the words of the Egyptologists who first gazed into the tomb of Tutankhamun. We have seen wonderful things. From the smallest prehistoric flint to the world's greatest liner, nothing is now inaccessible underwater. But significantly, Dr. Ballard's final act was to place a memorial on the deck of that great lost ship in the hope that man might profit wisely from his long-awaited legacy from beneath the sea.
The music which accompanies this series is available from BBC Records.